This video describes how to write an outline for 3 types of papers: a persuasive essay, a literature review, and a research design. The key points to remember are to use the outline to structure your argument and to keep it short. So when I'm talking about an outline in general, I am talking about a document that looks like this. You use numbered lists and bullet points to indicate the importance of different parts of your argument and their relationship to each other. There is a hierarchy to an outline. The first level of numbers indicates paragraphs, and lower levels indicate subpoints or evidence. This is one of the very few assignments where format really matters. Don't just write a few sentences and turn it in as a paragraph. Thinking about the structure of your argument is the point. You are probably most accustomed to writing persuasive essays that you use to support a thesis statement. For this type of outline, you need to think through what your thesis statement will be, then what the main arguments are that support that thesis. Your thesis will go in the introduction of your essay, and then you should have a paragraph for each of those sub-arguments. And that's how you should organize your outline. The thesis at the top, with each sub-argument given a number to form the top tier of your outline. These sentences, if properly done, can become the topic sentences of the paragraphs in the body of your essay. For example, let's say your thesis statement is that political institutions determine a country's economic growth. There are many ways you could make this argument. I will choose 2 here. That institutions shape incentives for individual behavior, and that corruption thrives when the judicial system does not prosecute it. These 2 arguments develop the idea summarized in the thesis, so they are your main points in the outline. You then need to provide evidence to support your argument. So that's what you list as the subpoints in the outline. You can mention articles you read in class that support the point, but it's really best to identify the specific facts within those articles that make your argument. For example, you could cite why nations fail to support your general point that market economies require a rule of law to guarantee competition. But it would be even better to cite the comparison of Bill Gates and Carlos Slim for how they built wealth, or the comparison of North and South Korea on how institutions promote prosperity. But don't describe the argument in detail, just write a sentence about each piece of evidence. So again, to summarize, the key things to include in an outline for a persuasive essay are your central points and the specific facts that support them. A literature review is not designed to persuade the reader that your thesis is correct, but rather to establish that the topic you have chosen to research and the hypothesis you have chosen to test it are valid and interesting. In this case, your introductory paragraph should describe your research question and provide context for it. For example, if your research question is on the relationship between gun control legislation and school shootings, one thing you can do in your introduction is to establish what the correlation between these 2 issues is. Essentially, do states that have more gun control legislation have fewer school shootings? After the introduction, the primary way you organize a literature review is by theory. This is what I mean by going issue by issue, not article by article. For example, if you've chosen to research why people vote for a particular candidate for U.S. president, your literature review needs to summarize existing theories for how people decide to vote. For example, based on party affiliation, candidates' past records, or perhaps candidates' biographies. Determining what these categories are is the main task of your literature review. Unlike an outline for a persuasive essay, it is actually fine to summarize articles in your outline of a literature review. What's important is to keep those summaries short. In the outline, you are just categorizing existing research. You're not explaining it. So try to get your summaries down to 1 phrase or sentence. Bear in mind also that you may want to use an article in more than 1 category of research. In that case, make sure you highlight the relevant part of the research in each section. Finally, an outline of a research design should help clarify the choices you're going to make in that design. So by the time you are outlining an actual research design, you're already going to have written your literature review, so please don't repeat that work. Focus on the choices you're making about cases, variables, and the method. The specifics are going to vary depending on the type of research you are proposing. If you're proposing a comparison of 2 countries, you're going to need to outline why those 2 countries are the best ones to study. If you're proposing a field experiment, you need to explain how you would achieve randomization. 2 things every research design outline will have in common, though, are discussions of variables and validity. If you are proposing to conduct statistical research, your discussion of variables is pretty straightforward. You need to state which variables from which data sets will measure your independent, dependent, and control variables. But even if you're doing other types of research, you still need to describe what your variables are and how you will incorporate them into your design. For example, for a controlled comparison of two cases, you need to explain what variables those two cases are similar on. These are your controls. Or, for survey research, you need to craft questions that accurately measure your cause and effect. So basically, no matter what, you are going to need a section where you briefly define your variables and state how you will observe them. Just as important, your research design will need to discuss the internal and external validity of your research plan. No design is perfect, and yours doesn't need to be, but you must be able to recognize and acknowledge the shortcomings of your study. So you should include a few notes on what these are. For example, do you fully describe a causal mechanism? Are there alternate explanations you might miss? If you're taking a sample, what are the consequences of doing so? This outline will help you structure your paper, but the primary purpose of a research design outline is to catch problems early in the process. By writing down your initial ideas for your design in a concise way, you can identify problems, or have me identify them, before you spend too much time actually writing the paper. So just to wrap up, an outline must have a numbered, hierarchical structure and must be concise. Use complete sentences, but don't write paragraphs. It is a tool to help you structure your arguments and identify problems in a paper before you spend too much time writing, and one I encourage you to use in all of your work.